print disability, which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is Jackie, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the Sunday, July 12th issue of the front section of the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. The Hamptons acquire a taste for chicken nuggets by Dion Searcy, Montauk, New York. The sun was about to set across Fort Pond in Montauk, and the revelers gathered at the nearby Surf Lodge were just starting to indulge themselves. The music thumped, champagne flowed, and across the bar, suntanned hands reached into $150 towers of Popeye's chicken tenders. "You can't take it with you," said Stephen Gay, a real estate agent who sells luxury properties in Florida, who had splurged on a $7,500 table that included the fast food tenders and a flight of dipping sauces. The Hamptons makes headlines for its luxury estates. The Hamptons makes headlines for its luxury estates, helicopter commutes, and extreme food options, including a $129.99 a pound lobster salad, a $400 Japanese melon, and a set of vending machines that dispense tins of beluga caviar at $225 for 2 ounces. But amid these hoity-toity status foods, the humble chicken tender, the fast food icon, a kid's menu staple, is thriving. By noon on any given day, the refrigerated cases in gourmet grocery stores, earlier stacked 5 high with containers of breaded, deep-fried chunks of chicken they call nuggets, fingers, strips, or tenders, may well be picked clean. A few restaurants offer adult chicken nuggets on their menus. Some private chefs say homemade nuggets are their most requested item. And you should see how some of these tenders are living out east. They are often served with Hamptons flair, and just as importantly, consumed in Hamptons environs. Dolloped with caviar, they're nibbled in gardens bursting with hydrangeas and behind the hedges of dun-lined roads clogged with party equipment rental trucks. Last month, Jarhan Bluestein, the founder of East End Mixology, decided to try a new cocktail on private chefs when they gathered in her backyard to test out a new Uruguayan caviar. She chopped homemade chicken nuggets and soaked them in beluga vodka, strained the concoction, and put the chicken-infused vodka in the freezer. Later, she removed any fat, added dry vermouth, a splash of barbecue sauce, shook and double-strained it. She filled martini glasses with the drink, garnishing each one with a caviar-topped nugget on a skewer. She called it the McNuggetini. The group loved it, she said. "It was literally like eating at McDonald's," Ms. Bluestein said. "It was so savory." Her nugget cocktail is not currently on any menus, though she plans to serve it at an industry party in September, a possible next step toward a public-facing version of the McNuggetini. Shippy's, a Southampton restaurant, delivers its chunky, thumb-sized chicken strips to the Food Shack at Cooper's Beach. At least 600 strips a day are sold during the summer, said Andre Bianchi, a manager, at a relatively reasonable $21 an order, which includes fries. The lightly cornmeal-battered, gluten-free, old-fashioned chicken tenders have been so popular at the Lobster Roll in Armageddon, the menu now includes them as an entree for what feels like a bargain at $18 and an appetizer for $14. You can go to the Palm and have a $300 steak, but sometimes you just feel like a chicken finger, said Jessica Van Camp, a manager at the Lobster Roll. The Palm's priciest steak actually costs half that much. Any form of chicken nugget brings us all back to being a kid and comfort food and beach picnics, said Kelly Delaney Cott, the editor of K.D. Hamptons, a luxury lifestyle diary of the town, who likes to serve caviar-topped nuggets at her poolside luncheons in Watermill. There becomes a little bit of a competition of who can make the best ones. Some insist the organic, crispy fingers at the high-end grocery farm and forage are best. Others favor the heavily battered tenders topped with flakes of sea salt from Round Swamp Farms. On a recent morning at the farm's Bridgehampton Deli, a woman stood in line with $54 worth of tenders in her shopping basket. "So the tenders are good then?" "Insane," she replied. The Popeyes tenders are actually an upgrade for Montauk's Surf Lodge. In years past, the restaurant would charge $150 for towers of reheated frozen products from Tyson's. Popeyes is paying for the privilege of offering its chicken to an elite clientele in Montauk, where zoning laws have made fast food chains scarce. It's part of an expansive brand partnership program for the bar that on a recent night included Starbucks, Polymarket, Neutrogena, a makeup brand called Too Faced, and Nylon, an invite-only social club for young tastemakers, according to its website. The new tenders are handmade in the bar's retrofitted kitchen, according to Popeye's recipe and specifications, said Jema Cardoso, the Surf Lodge owner. "We were looking for ways to elevate the experience," Ms. Cardoso said. During a recent lunchtime stretch, the chicken tenders at the nearest Popeyes in Riverhead, about 45 miles away, were going for $15.83 for 11 pieces. The dining room, lit by orange pendant lamps with a view of the parking lot, was empty. Context matters when it comes to breaded chicken. "It's all about how you serve it," said Kathy Pronas, a commercial designer who offers musings on the Hamptons lifestyle on social media. "And perhaps where you serve it, and to whom." Last week, Elena Apostolides, a private chef, stood over the marble countertop at a client's kitchen in East Hampton and carefully placed her gluten-free homemade nuggets dredged in rice flour batter on a bed of micro-radish greens. She spooned creme fraiche onto each nugget, then topped them with a dab of caviar. She headed to the pool where a group of hungry 20-somethings were taking a dip. "Wow," one man said. There are photographs, full-color photograph of 4 20-something women standing by a 3-tiered, they are like aluminum tin plates filled with Popeye's chicken tenders and on top of a bed of French fries. And they have different dipping sauces also in these plates. And these women are eating their Popeye's chicken tenders. The picture below that has a young man who has a rattan bowl with French fries and chicken nuggets in it, as if he's serving them. And then next to that is a picture of 2 women that are wearing polo shirts with an insignia on it of a restaurant, and they're holding an order of these. The caption reads, "Above, partygoers with a Popeye's chicken tower at the Surf Lodge in Montauk." Andre Bianchi, the manager of Cooper's Beach Shack with chicken strips, and the manager of Lunch Lobster Roll, Jessica Van Camp, holding tenders. Below, you see a person with a blue shopping basket. It's the kind of blue shopping basket that has the two handles. And the caption reads, "A customer grabbing Round Swamp Farms chicken fingers in Bridgehampton, New York." There's a photo next to that of a man eating a chicken tender, and that caption says, "Stephen Gay splurged on a $7,500 table at the Surf Lodge that included Popeye's tenders and dipping sauces. You can't take it with you," he said. Rubio controls Venezuela from afar in Washington. The country's recovery is vital to Trump's goal of securing American access to oil. By Tyler Pager and Antony Kurmaveth. President Trump was sitting in the Oval Office earlier this year with Secretary of State Marco Rubio when an idea came to him. Maybe he should dispatch Mr. Rubio permanently to Caracas, the Venezuelan capital, where U.S. commandos had carried out the proudest foreign policy achievement of Mr. Trump's second term, the capture of Nicolás Maduro, the country's president. Mr. Rubio could be the next leader of Venezuela, Mr. Trump suggested, and while the president's aides say he was joking and that he frequently teases Mr. Rubio about an overseas assignment, the fact is that Mr. Rubio does not need to move to Caracas. He already runs Venezuela from Washington. In the 6 months since U.S. forces blew open Mr. Maduro's bedroom door and snatched him in the dead of night, Mr. Rubio has become the de facto viceroy of Venezuela, holding sway over a sovereign nation in a way that no American officials has since L. Paul Bremer III arrived in Baghdad in 2003 to run U.S.-occupied Iraq. Mr. Rubio now effectively controls Venezuela's finances, the distribution of its natural resources, and its government, according to interviews with more than a dozen officials and people close to both governments in Washington and Caracas, who provided details about his involvement in steering the country's policies. Many spoke on condition of anonymity to describe private interactions and internal discussions. While he has not visited Venezuela in person since the U.S. took over, the Secretary of State is deeply involved in the country's day-to-day operations, keeping in close contact with Delcy Rodriguez, who was Mr. Maduro's vice president and now leads her country on an acting basis with the imprimatur of the United States. The two exchange messages in Spanish on WhatsApp, trading gossip, birthday greetings, and selfies. Despite the banter, the relationship between Mr. Rubio and Ms. Rodriguez is far from a partnership. It is a manifestation of Trump-era American power, in which the winner takes all regardless of sovereignty or international law. The Venezuelan government did not respond to a request for comment. The Trump administration did not address detailed questions about Mr. Rubio's authority in Venezuela. Mr. Rubio has downplayed his role and largely avoids discussing his work. He declined multiple requests for an interview. Tommy Pigott, a State Department spokesman, said in a statement that with renewed cooperation and sound economic stewardship, Venezuela can reemerge as a stable, prosperous partner whose citizens benefit from their relationship. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the front section of the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Venezuela's citizenship can take advantage of vast natural wealth and strengthen ties with the United States. The direct control over Venezuela's public revenues, in particular, distinguishes Washington's influence there from most other countries beholden to its military and financial might. The U.S. Treasury receives the revenue from most of Venezuela's exports, then disperses it gradually to Venezuela through the country's private banks, a relationship akin to parents holding out allowances to children. Mr. Rubio and his team set the conditions on what that money can be spent on and by whom. The system has allowed Mr. Rubio to stop Venezuela's most egregious corruption schemes, and it brings some benefits to the Venezuelan government, which uses the effective protection of the U.S. Treasury to receive revenues without being hounded by the numerous creditors seeking repayment of billions in unpaid debt. But the arrangement has also given Mr. Rubio immense leverage over Ms. Rodriguez, who depends on the money to pay workers and prop up the national currency. He also oversees the application of U.S. sanctions on Venezuela, deciding who gets to do business in the country and how. He has worked to reshape the oil sector and boosted the access of U.S. companies. For her part, Ms. Rodriguez runs important government appointments by him, such as the Minister of Defense. Since 2 earthquakes struck Venezuela last month, Mr. Rubio has sought to bolster the country's interim government. The United States has sent 900 military personnel to Venezuela, committed nearly $400 million in aid, and delivered crates of cash to the Venezuelan government. The earthquakes have complicated Mr. Rubio's stated mission to return Venezuela to democracy. It's a setback in that regard, Mr. Rubio acknowledged last month. But the country's ability to recover is critical to Mr. Trump's ultimate goal, securing Venezuelan oil for U.S. interests. The arrangement is deeply unusual, unfolding 80 years after the United States relinquished its last sizable formal colony, the Philippines. But Mr. Trump has made clear he wants to return to an era of American expansionism, musing about taking control of Greenland, Canada, and the Panama Canal. He's found most success in Venezuela, but there are risks. Mr. Trump's critics accuse the United States of siphoning Venezuela's resources and propping up an authoritarian government by leaving Mr. Maduro's henchmen largely in place. The arrangement also entangles the United States in the fortunes of a deeply unpopular, unelected regime facing increasingly restless clamor for political change. Secretary Rubio said that we are not at war with Venezuela, Representative Sean Casten, a Democrat of Illinois, said to Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent during a congressional hearing in February. What authority, Mr. Casten asked, did the United States have to control Venezuelan assets? Mr. Bessent told Mr. Casten that he would get back to him on that. Mr. Rubio's hard-nosed realpolitik in Venezuela is a sharp departure for a man who spent his career fashioning himself as a champion for democracy in Latin America. He has said his goal is an eventual democratic transition. The outcome of the Venezuela foray could shape Mr. Rubio's political future as Mr. Trump considers his successor. Make Venezuela great again. In the early hours of January 3rd, shortly after Mr. Maduro was captured, Mr. Rubio reached Ms. Rodriguez by phone. Speaking in Spanish, Mr. Rubio told her that she had a choice between working with the United States or witnessing a broader attack targeting Venezuela's infrastructure, military bases, and senior officials. After some negotiation, Ms. Rodriguez agreed. She told Mr. Rubio that she's essentially willing to do what we think is necessary to make Venezuela great again, according to Mr. Trump. The president said the United States would run the country until there was a safe, proper, and judicious transition of power. Days later, Mr. Trump told the New York Times in an interview that he expected the United States to run Venezuela for years. At the center of the fulcrum is Mr. Rubio, dubbed by other officials as Viceroy, the title given to the powerful governors who ruled the Spanish Empire until Venezuela and most of its other provinces rebelled and won independence in the early 19th century. As Ms. Rodriguez started to set up her government, Mr. Rubio weighed in on key personnel decisions and encouraged her to purge Mr. Maduro's family and business partners. She followed through. Most Venezuelans expressed relief at Mr. Maduro's downfall, only to watch in disbelief as the Trump administration struck an alliance with most of his chief enforcers. Inflation has fallen, but remains the world's highest, and the country's currency keeps losing value. Millions are clamoring for new elections, putting pressure on Mr. Rubio to move beyond economic deals and bring political change. Investors are nervous about putting capital into a system that could crumble at any moment. Before the earthquakes, Ms. Rodriguez had been asking Mr. Rubio for more financial autonomy and the scrapping of economic sanctions to reduce the domestic pressure on her government. Mr. Rubio has been sympathetic to her arguments, but the U.S. government has not released control. Mr. Rubio's work with Ms. Rodriguez has provoked grumbling among some career U.S. diplomats, Venezuelan Americans, and Mr. Trump's allies, who bristle at the idea that Mr. Maduro's chief lieutenant is in power. Mr. Rubio and other officials have dismissed those concerns, pointing to how Ms. Rodriguez has followed nearly every order the administration has made, especially those related to the country's finances. Venezuela sells much of its oil through two oil trading companies, Trafigura and Vitol, in an arrangement set up by the Trump administration. Mr. Rubio has largely eclipsed Chris Wright, the Energy Secretary, in opening up Venezuela's oil industry to foreign investment, the cornerstone of Mr. Trump's vision for the country. He has prioritized the arrival of new American companies at the expense of European oil producers who were already working in the country. Ben Dietrich, a spokesman for Mr. Wright, said the Secretary has worked closely with Mr. Rubio and has spoken regularly with energy industry leaders and Ms. Rodriguez. Washington's grip on Venezuela's economy extends beyond the oil revenues. Mr. Rubio's team drafts the licenses that provide companies who want to do business in Venezuela with exemptions from sanctions. Mr. Rubio has warned Ms. Rodriguez's government to abstain from business with U.S. adversaries. Following Mr. Maduro's downfall, for example, Venezuela's state oil company has quietly taken over the operation of the oil projects that it co-owns with Russia's state-run Rosneft. Rosneft did not respond to requests for comment. The Trump administration has also successfully pressured Ms. Rodriguez to turn over Venezuelans who have crossed the Justice Department. At the behest of the United States, Ms. Rodriguez's government in February detained Alex Saab, the billionaire friend and business partner of Mr. Maduro, and approved his extradition to the United States after stripping him of his Venezuelan passport. Some officials believe the Justice Department wants to use Mr. Saab to strengthen the case against Mr. Maduro, who has been charged with various drug trafficking crimes. And in June, the Rodriguez government helped the United States kill a criminal boss with long-standing ties to Venezuelan officials, according to several people familiar with the operation. U.S. forces used the intelligence provided by Ms. Rodriguez's officials to kill Nino Guerrero, one of the leaders of the gang Tren de Aragna, in a missile strike in a remote area of southern Venezuela. It was the first military collaboration between the two countries in decades. The Venezuelan government later recovered the gang leader's body and passed it to the United States. The Trump administration has accused Tren de Aragna of working with Mr. Maduro to flood the United States with drugs and illegal migrants, even though U.S. intelligence agencies last year assessed that Mr. Maduro did not control the gang. The Trump administration even exerts control over Ms. Rodriguez's public appearances and statements. In May, Mr. Rubio announced that Ms. Rodriguez would travel to India before the Venezuelan government mentioned it, surprising Venezuelan officials and foreign diplomats. When the Fox News anchor Brett Baer contacted Ms. Rodriguez about participating in an interview, she told him that Mr. Trump would have to approve. Mr. Trump loved that Ms. Rodriguez was deferring to him and has repeatedly recounted the story to others when they ask about her, according to multiple people familiar with his comments. When the United States attacked Iran, Yvonne Gill, Venezuela's foreign minister, issued a soft condemnation of the aggression against Venezuela's longtime ally. The Trump administration communicated to Ms. Rodriguez that the post should be taken down and warned her not to publicly support its adversaries again. Mr. Gill deleted the post hours after posting it. In effect, it was an admission that Venezuela no longer sets its foreign policy. Mr. Gill did not respond to a request for comment. Reassurance from Trump. Mr. Rubio was asleep in Bahrain last month when he was awakened by a call from the White House Situation Room. 2 massive earthquakes had hit Venezuela, and early images were grim. Entire neighborhoods were flattened, and scores of people were missing. Shortly after, Mr. Rubio spoke to Ms. Rodriguez, promising the full assistance of the United States. American rescue teams were on the ground 2 days later. Mr. Rubio has described the administration's plans for Venezuela in 3 phases: recover the economy, stabilize the country, and transition it to democracy. Before the earthquakes, U.S. officials said they were in the second phase, working to open up Venezuela to international investment. To further that goal, senior Trump administration officials have traveled to Venezuela to meet their counterparts and strike new energy and mining deals. The resulting announcements, however, have mostly been optimistic outlines of potential investments. In March, Doug Burgum, the Interior Secretary, visited Venezuela and met with Ms. Rodriguez at the presidential palace. During the visit, Mr. Rubio texted her to ask how the meeting was going. Ms. Rodriguez said it was going well and sent a selfie with Mr. Burgum. But the meeting was overshadowed by damaging news. Reuters reported that day that the Justice Department was quietly building a legal case against Ms. Rodriguez. Ms. Rodriguez's administration was shocked and sought clarification from the White House. To allay Ms. Rodriguez's concern, Todd Blanche, then the Deputy Attorney General, called the report completely false. But the Venezuelan government sought further assurances. So the next day, Mr. Rubio texted Ms. Rodriguez the link to a social media post from the U.S. president. Delcy Rodriguez, who is the president of Venezuela, is doing a great job and working with the U.S. representatives very well, Mr. Trump wrote. Ms. Rodriguez was pleased and wanted to thank Mr. Trump with a post of her own, but first she shared the draft with Mr. Rubio. She posted it after receiving his approval. Before Mr. Maduro's capture, U.S. prosecutors had been looking into many Venezuelan officials, including Ms. Rodriguez, though it is unclear if those efforts have revealed evidence of crimes. The Associated Press reported in May that the Trump administration told prosecutors to stop investigating Ms. Rodriguez. The success of the efforts to bring stability to Venezuela, the second phase of Mr. Rubio's plan, largely hinges on foreign investment. But investors are cautious. The oil sector is degraded and corrupt, and Ms. Rodriguez's grip on power is uncertain. The earthquakes have delayed the negotiations for new oil contracts. Mr. Trump appears unworried. He's repeatedly suggested that Venezuela could become the 51st state. Who may lead the country on a more permanent basis is still deeply uncertain. Maria Corina Machado, the exiled opposition leader, remains the country's most popular politician. But she has sworn enemies among Venezuela's security and military officials, leading Mr. Rubio to bypass her and settle on Ms. Rodriguez as the country's handpicked leader. Once a staunch supporter of Ms. Machado, Mr. Rubio has distanced himself from her in recent months. The cooling relationship between the Trump administration and Ms. Machado became an open breach after the earthquakes. U.S. officials have refused to help her return to Venezuela out of fear of stoking unrest. The time frame for the final phase of Mr. Rubio's Venezuela plan, the free elections, remains undefined. When the Times asked Ms. Rodriguez in May when she would hold elections, she said, "I don't know. Sometime." Political analysts say that Ms. Rodriguez may be trying to run out the clock on the Trump presidency, hoping that the pressure to hold the vote would fade under his successor. For now, the question of when an election would be held is not in her hands. It is in Mr. Rubio's. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the front section of the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. In Replacing Platner, Party Relives Tensions Over Switch to Harris by Reed Epstein. Maine Democrats do not have to look far for a primer on what it is like to replace a deeply flawed nominee forced off the ballot weeks before a deadline to be stuck with him. 2 Julys ago, former President Joseph R. Biden Jr. succumbed to political reality following his debate meltdown and ended his re-election bid. Party officials had just 2 weeks to choose a replacement. Now, with Graham Platner's formal withdrawal from the Maine Senate race on Friday after a rape allegation that he denies, the state party's officials have to find a new candidate and convince voters that the selection process was fair. Recent history suggests neither task is easy. The 2024 appointment of Vice President Kamala Harris left a trail of hurt feelings that have yet to heal and second-guessing that has not stopped. It would be really awesome if they didn't Kamala Harris us, said Michael Rowell, 45, a Democrat of Sullivan, Maine. A lot of people were disappointed by the way they handled that transition. Last-minute switches are difficult, said Jamie Harrison, who in 2024 was the Democratic National Committee chairman who oversaw the transition from Mr. Biden to Ms. Harris. The reality and the expectations people have are not the same, and that creates a lot of issues for the Maine Democratic Party now, just like at the DNC 2 years ago. In many ways, Mr. Platner's successor will face a steeper climb than Ms. Harris did when she took over for Mr. Biden 107 days before the election. Mr. Platner boasts 15,000 volunteers. But in his 11-minute withdrawal video, he made no appeal for them to transfer to his successor. And after bowing out in disgrace, Mr. Platner's endorsement is not in high demand in Maine's abbreviated primary process or its general election. Ms. Harris inherited Mr. Biden's donor lists and was an immediate fundraising juggernaut. Mr. Platner's campaign was nearly broke and struggled to build a large donor program. Whoever replaces him will have to start from scratch. While some of the prospects are former candidates for governor or Senate, quickly pivoting to a high-profile general election campaign will not be easy. On Thursday, the X account of the Senate Democratic campaign arm sent direct messages to Democratic influencers asking them to help raise money for Platner's replacement. Would you be willing to share the nominee fund ActBlue link to your followers and anyone else who might be interested in amplifying the committee wrote. Veterans of the 2024 switch said it would be important for Maine's Democratic leadership to leave backers of Mr. Plattner and whoever does not win the Senate nomination feeling as if they were sufficiently included in the replacement process. As terrible as Graham Plattner is, you have to make sure that those people who supported him don't feel their voices are discarded in the process, said Quentin Fulks, who was a deputy campaign manager for Mr. Biden and then Ms. Harris. It's not hard to find Democrats who, in retrospect, feel it was a mistake to anoint Ms. Harris without a competitive process, though few will say so publicly out of fear of alienating the former vice president's supporters or appearing to insult black women, one of the party's core constituencies. Mr. Plattner, with his myriad warts, was a candidate who created organic excitement from Maine Democrats. The field to replace him does not include anyone who has spawned similar enthusiasm in their political careers. The thing that powered the effectiveness of the switch for us was the enthusiasm for Kamala Harris. People were excited, said Rob Flaherty, a deputy campaign manager on the Biden and Harris campaigns, who last week apologized on his podcast for his past support of Mr. Plattner. Part of the question of, is this switch going to work, is going to be, are people excited about the choice? Ms. Harris and many of her allies have lamented that she had but 107 days between Mr. Biden's dropping out and the general election. Maine's new Democratic Senate nominee is expected to have even less time. While the Democratic National Committee had rules in place 2 years ago that governed how it would replace Mr. Biden, Maine Democrats have had to create their process last week with little time for consideration. Maine law gives the party-wide latitude to decide how it will choose a new nominee, and officials have discussed holding a 600-member convention before the July 27th deadline for a new nominee. But they do not have to democratize the process, and not everybody in Democratic circles thinks it's a good idea to do so. Liam Kerr, a co-founder of Welcome PAC, a centrist Democratic group, said the Maine Democratic Party chairman would be better off to simply anoint Representative Jared Golden, who has twice won re-election while President Trump carried the district. Mr. Golden, one of the most conservative Democrats in Washington, has said he is not interested, and his centrist views mean it is unlikely he could win at a party convention where activists who participate tend to skew more liberal. Mr. Kerr said he was unconcerned about the prospect of nominating Mr. Golden, resulting in hurt feelings from Mr. Plattner's supporters. There weren't enough hurt feelings 2 years ago, Mr. Kerr said. Of Mr. Golden, he added, he won a district Trump won by 10 points. It's like we have Michael Jordan in his prime and we're letting the season ticket holders play horse to decide who our starting guard is. Top universities admit fewer PhD students, posing a risk to research, by Vimal Patel. The number of students admitted to PhD programs this fall dropped 15% from the previous year, according to data from over 50 top research universities, raising fears that the nation's capacity to produce new science could be diminished. The decline is driven in part by a chaotic and unpredictable federal funding environment under the Trump administration, as federal cuts are promised and then reversed and budgets remain unclear. A reduction in doctoral students could mean fewer scholars at universities to teach and mentor undergraduates. Higher education leaders also worry that if the declines continue, there will be fewer researchers to power a rapidly evolving scientific workforce. The data showing the decrease comes from 55 universities, all of them members of the Association of American Universities, an invitation-only organization that includes 69 of the most prestigious research institutions in the United States. The data collection was conducted by another group, the Association of American Universities Data Exchange. Schools in AAU confer half of the nation's research doctorates, according to the association. We are at risk of losing a whole generation of new talent because of the reduction in the capacity to support those students, said Toby Smith, a senior vice president at the AAU. University leaders and research advocates cite many reasons for the declines in new doctoral students. Federal agencies such as the National Institutes of Health and National Science Foundation have been funding fewer research grants. The wealthiest institutions also face a new federal tax on their endowments. But the most cited reason in interviews was the unreliable nature of federal funding under the Trump administration. The administration proposed major cuts to federal research agencies last year, but Congress restored the funding. It is again proposing big cuts. While Congress may again reverse the administration's proposed reductions, the uncertainty makes it hard for schools to make multi-year commitments to doctoral students. The administration also abruptly ended thousands of research grants last year, arguing that they did not align with the government's priorities. The administration restored many of the grants after judges deemed the eliminations illegal and arbitrary, but research advocates saying the whiplash was damaging. Hiring for research projects is not like turning a light switch on and off, they said, and disruptions can have a long tail. Mr. Smith said declines in funding at agencies like the National Science Foundation, where new awards have dwindled to a trickle, had disproportionately hurt new scholars hoping to start their scientific careers. Travis York, a director at the American Association for the Advancement of Science, said developing research talent is more like planting an orchard rather than filling a warehouse. Dr. York, who has a doctorate in higher education administration, said the consequences of a decline in new PhD students because of funding uncertainty will not simply be felt on campuses this fall and next year. It really will ripple across the U.S. innovation ecosystem for years to come. In a statement, Liz Houston, a White House spokeswoman, said President Trump was committed to keeping America the world leader in scientific innovation. That means funding real science, not left-wing ideology, she said. For years, federal grant dollars were funneled into politicized research with little accountability to taxpayers or results to show for it. This administration is ending that waste and restoring a simple standard. Grants should go to the best science, not politics. That's how we maintain American global dominance. The data provided to the New York Times show only overall reductions and do not show breakdowns by discipline. But anecdotal data and announcements from several universities suggest they are hitting science and humanities programs across the board. Declines this fall also appear to be stacking on top of losses in PhD student capacity from last year. The AAUDE collected data for fall 2025 and found that for the 42 schools that responded, new enrollments dropped 11% from the previous year. Enrollments and admissions are not the same, but tend to be good proxies for each other in doctoral education. The central takeaway AAU official said is that the data shows 2 years of a substantial reduction in the number of PhD students being admitted and ultimately enrolled at major research universities. Sally Kornbluth, the president of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, said in a message to the campus in May that while Congress restored some agency cuts, the money was not actually flowing to MIT the way it typically has. She said new federal research awards were down 20% and also cited the effects of a new tax on the school's endowment. The school is expecting nearly 20% fewer new graduate students, with only a handful of exceptions, Dr. Kornbluth said. The loss adds up to about 500 students, which she said would hurt undergraduates who will have fewer research mentors. It's a loss for the nation, she said. When you shrink the pipeline of basic discovery research, you choke off the flow of future solutions, innovations, and cures, and you shrink the supply of future scientists. The California Institute of Technology, another of the nation's premier research institutions, said it would reduce its new graduate students by 40% in the fall of 2026, across the board. The reason was not specific cuts, but lack of funding certainty, David Chan, the university's Dean of Graduate Studies, said in an interview. The hope is to go back to historic numbers, but we don't know when that will happen, he said, adding that decisions for fall 2027 have not been made yet, given how quickly things are changing. Jessica Work, the astronomy department chair at the University of Washington, said the institution was facing a mix of state budget cuts and worries about the Trump administration's proposals. There's all these external factors that are just kind of pressing in on us, said Dr. Work, whose department typically hires about 4 new doctoral students a year from an application pool of about 400. She decided not to take any new doctoral students in fall of 2026, the first time at least since 2016 when she joined the department, and planned to hire again in 2027. The data from the AAU institutions also show a decline in the applications to PhD programs, a gauge of demand driven by international students. While applications from domestic students increased by 3%, applications from international students fell by 21%. The Trump administration has taken a series of actions that experts say have dampened the desire of international students to study in the United States, including delaying visa interviews, expanding a ban on travel from certain countries, and screening the social media posts of applicants for speech deemed anti-American. The decline in applications from international students, Mr. Smith said, comes as other countries like China are making a strong recruitment push to take advantage of the United States' unforced errors. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the front section of the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. A man is sentenced in a heist of rare manuscripts at UCLA by Ali Watkins. The first of the rare books went missing just before the coronavirus pandemic. 2 centuries-old Chinese manuscripts, borrowed by a visitor using the name Alan Fujimori from the rare books collection of the University of California, Los Angeles. 4 years later, 6 more were requested, this time checked out by a Jason Wang. A year later, in August of 2025, a man named Austin Chen borrowed 8 more. To library staff, perhaps it seemed that UCLA's East Asia Rare Books collection had a new following, until librarians opened a storage box and realized the truth. None of the original books had been returned. On Wednesday, Jeffrey Ying, 39, was sentenced in a California court for the string of thefts, having purloined rare Chinese manuscripts worth more than $200,000 using aliases, fake IDs, and dummy manuscripts. He had pleaded guilty to one count of major art theft in October of 2025. According to investigators, Mr. Ying of Fremont, California, would borrow the rare books for a few days at a time, create copies, affix fake asset tags, and bring back the dummy versions of the works. He regularly traveled to and from China within days of the thefts, according to court documents. The authorities have not said what happened to the missing items. The scheme unraveled in August of 2025. Mr. Ying was arrested in California after he returned to the UCLA library and was recognized by staff who alerted the police. Investigators searched Mr. Ying's hotel room and discovered blank manuscript pages, fake versions of the books, and manufactured labels. Key to the brief success of Mr. Ying's plot was that university libraries often struggle to keep close tabs on their sprawling collections, which has made them fertile ground for thieves. In the 1980s, Robert Kindred, a struggling antiquities dealer, pillaged university libraries nationwide, stealing countless rare prints and pages from collections. More recently, in 2020, an archivist at the Carnegie Library of Pittsburgh pleaded guilty to stealing some of the library's rarest items, valued at $8 million. A judge on Wednesday sentenced Mr. Ying to time served, 1 year of home confinement, and 3 years of supervised release. U.S. employers are told to fire thousands of immigrants, by Miriam Jordan and Madeline Nigo. The Department of Homeland Security told employers on Friday that they must let go in the coming weeks the hundreds of thousands of foreign workers who have been allowed to live in the United States through a humanitarian program the Trump administration has sought to dismantle. The work permits of Haitians with temporary protected status will expire on July 24th. Such permits will also lapse on July 17th for those from Ethiopia, Myanmar, Somalia, South Sudan, Syria, and Yemen, according to notices issued for each affected country by U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, which oversees the legal immigration system. The guidance comes on the heels of the Supreme Court's decision last month upholding the Trump administration's authority to end protections for TPS holders from Haiti and Syria. Once the terminations take effect, the recipients become vulnerable to deportation. More than 330,000 Haitians and 6,100 Syrians have been living in the country under the program, a designation granted by the U.S. government when it determines that crisis conditions in a country, such as a natural disaster or civil unrest, make it unsafe for its citizens to return. The 5 other countries collectively have about 20,000 TPS holders, according to the National Immigration Forum, an advocacy group. U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services had been extending work authorization in short increments. The agency had previously set the expiration date for July 1st, and then extended it to July 10th for all the countries. On Friday, it did so again. But some employers had already terminated workers by the time they were notified of the extension. Other employers had kept such workers on the payroll with the understanding that the Supreme Court's ruling would probably not take effect for about 30 days. Jacob Monti, legal counsel for the American Business Immigration Coalition, said that many employers were confused by the shifting dates and had feared they could face penalties for employing people who are now ineligible to work in the United States. We still have rule of law, and TPS has still not been terminated, he said in an interview. USCIS, could have clarified the issue, he said. Many employers were uncertain, leading them to unnecessarily terminate the workers early. Thousands of TPS recipients from Haiti work in the healthcare sector and as caregivers to older Americans. The program has also allowed thousands of beneficiaries to work in manufacturing, construction, and transportation industries. In addition to immigrants from Haiti and Syria, the countries at the center of the Supreme Court case, the administration had already announced its intent to end temporary protected status, TPS, for workers from the other 5 countries. Lawsuits in federal court had prevented the terminations, but the Supreme Court ruling created a precedent that is expected to lead the lower courts to allow them to go ahead. The government notices to employers cite the Supreme Court decision, saying that the federal courts were expected to align with the High Court's ruling in favor of the administration. The Department of Homeland Security did not immediately respond to a request for comment. Lawyers for Haitians and Syrians argued that the TPS terminations had been politically motivated, preordained, and rooted in racial animus. But the majority in the 6-3 decision, split along ideological lines, found that the Homeland Security Secretary had the authority to end the program. While the government recently extended temporary protected status for those from Lebanon, the Supreme Court decision likely will embolden it to end the status for additional countries. For example, it is widely expected to let El Salvador's protection, which covers about 200,000 people, lapse in early September. During Mr. Trump's first term, courts blocked the termination. The program has been in place since 1990. But the Trump administration has long described it as a de facto permanent immigration scheme because many people have had the status for years as previous administrations repeatedly extended the protections. Immigrant advocates have denounced the Trump administration's efforts to terminate TPS programs, underscoring that conditions in several of the countries remain deeply unstable. South Sudan, Somalia, and Yemen have been grappling with armed conflict, failing infrastructure, and fallout from severe cuts in international aid. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the Sunday, July 12th issue of the front section of the New York Times. We read from the front section of the New York Times every Sunday at 1 p.m. Your reader has been Jackie. Thank you for listening.
Coming up next in the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service, we have a reading of the New York Times opinion page. Following that at 3 o'clock, the New York Times Arts and Leisure, and at 4 o'clock, a rebroadcast of this morning's Buffalo News. Radio Reading mails out a large print program schedule to our listeners every other month. If you have not received a Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service large print program schedule in the mail, please call us at 716-821-5555. We will make sure that you receive one every other month. A Braille version of the schedule is also available upon request. Our number again is 716-821-5555. following program is intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision, or have another print disability.